Okay, so we don't have any minutes for this meeting for approval, but we do have an adjustment to the agenda.
Yes, I actually, oops. They're on. Okay, I actually have a few this evening. On number 8, superintendent's report, letter A, I would like to add a resignation. Number 9, administrative reports, A, mental health supports for students. Dr. Sellers is unable to be with us this evening, so we're going to remove it. We will move that to another board meeting, as well as number 12, budget review. 5, instructional support. We'll move that to next time as well. Number 14, I'd like to add an item
other update other than what we have typically had in our budget. And on the other
vacation classrooms to 4. with purchase, and everything to get that classroom set up, as well as the classroom library.
Slightly larger chairs from the 4-year-olds.
Yes. And I think they're taking the chairs with them.
So just so I understand, on the sheet where it says that there's 103 fourth graders with 4 teachers, that's existing, right? So that's without the addition of the new one?
Correct. And that number has come down slightly. We've had some, especially with the transition at the Casco Bay Inn, that number is 96 as of today. With I have one student who's an enrollment for next year, so 97.
I'm curious on, are there sort of benchmarks for the size of a school that generally supports a full-time school year assistant principal? How do we compare to that? Because it seems like we're kind of consistently adding assistant principals around, and not that it's a bad thing. I mean, clearly there's need. I'm also curious, it seems like a lot of the special education programming is what's driving it. And we've kind of split up programs across the district, which I wonder, I wonder the thought process of should they be more centralized so that there could be one administrator who's helping with, so there's not assistant principals all over dealing with, smaller special education programs. That's probably a bigger question than for us to have tonight, but I was just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'll try to go through. There are several questions embedded in that. So if
like
you're off path. I think the first, is there a metric? No. And quite frankly, when I arrived at Mass Landing, I would never have guessed that an assistant principal would be something that I would consider, when we were at 230 students. I think the shift is not just an enrollment shift, but also a student need shift. The skills that kids come to school with truly look different. Typically, nearly every day I am radioed about the safety issue, right? That was not the case when I came to Mass Landing, or when I was starting the district 10 years ago. So I think it's those two things hand in hand. And I think that actually speaks to the special education question, which I don't actually think I want to be careful that the narrative isn't that it's a special education need, but the numbers. The reason some of these programs are live at every building is because we have numbers that support them. So our program, it has 8 students in it, our LIFT program, which is really about the capacity for a program with students with the intensity of need who are serviced. And so even if you were to consolidate programs, you would have to be running separate programs. And that's just a shift. I remember when Julie and I started in the district, at one point, we were surprised at the lack of kids who had identified autism that were getting specialized programming. It seemed atypical. And what we've seen, and I think as we build programs then too, right, the benefit is you have families who have trust in those programs and who live in the community because of the trust in the program. So I don't know that it's an issue, for example, with LIFT programming, that consolidation would be a cost savings. And the benefit is that kids are able to be in their home school communities. And I think it's a shift both within special education. The number I wasn't able to pull today, I was curious, just thinking even how many kids have IEPs at Mass Landing School versus 5 to 10 years ago. I know our 504s have doubled. That's like another metric to consider. So truly what kids bring. And I'll say the other piece is what parents are looking for support. So an area we get more calls, my school counselor particularly, but myself as well, is parents looking for support when kids having generalized anxiety, when kids are struggling with self-regulation. Parents are looking to the school for that support. And of course, we want to offer it. We want to partner with parents, but that requires the capacity to do so. And so I think it's a shift. I think special education is a piece of it, but I wouldn't want to oversimplify it by suggesting that that's the primary piece. Did that answer each level
Several
of your
questions.
question?
Thank you. Yes, no, it does. And I'm sorry if it came across that I was implying that it was all special ed, right? But it seems like it's a big portion of each of the additions we've added for an assistant principal. So in my math head, I go, well, if we could just have one that does that at one location for multiple classrooms, it's probably a question for Dr. Sellers anyway. But I was just curious what your thoughts were and around the benchmark. Obviously the needs are changing in the district and we want to meet the needs of our kids. And
but it's, you know, it's two positions in 1 year is a lot. So I was just asking the question.
Yeah, and know that one thing we've grappled with in discussion, both as a district team, but also as a school community, is what's the best way to meet that need, right? Because administration is one, but not the only, right? We talked about social workers. When Julie was in this position a year ago, we talked about kind of a behavioral strategist, right? And looking at the pros and cons of each role, especially from a fiscal perspective, right? A way to do it with less fiscal impact. And through each of those conversations have arrived at this conclusion. I certainly can kind of talk more about that if it's helpful at some point. But know that there were other explorations about how to address the shift in need that we're seeing.
Thank you. Colin.
Thanks so much for this. I've got a couple questions, but I'll ask them maybe one at a time because they're maybe a little bit disparate. If we were to decide that we could not afford to fund the 4th grade teacher position, what would be the real world impact of that and how you would run the 4th grade next year?
Yeah, I mean, what we would do is we would create, so that cohort's in 5 classes right now. They would go to 4. So those class sizes would be 20. I think I'm doing the math right, 24. And I think we would likely shift. We have one regular ed tech that we would likely shift to that grade. And that's what we did this year for 5th grade when we started the year in a similar position. We have classes that cohort's a little bit smaller than the cohort we're talking about. And so what it would do is pull resources from another grade in order to support those larger than typical class sizes.
And if I could piggyback on what Emily said as well, this is before summer's come and anyone's registered, and we know we're going to get additional students in that grade level over the summer, most likely.
Yeah, I mean, to speak a little bit, I think if I had a teacher here beside me, because our 5th grade is in, we have a 5th grade class of 24 currently, and I think the feedback and reflections I've heard from her, as well as some others who have class sizes that tip close to that, is the challenge is compared to our goal, right? Is it doable? Absolutely. But compared to the standard we set, so conferences are this week, right? When you're meeting with 24 families, that's a different thing. Parent communication, doing small group instruction, which is an embedded part of all the curriculum that we use. When you're, thinking about if you have groups of 3 or 4, getting to those groups across the week looks very different as those numbers creep up. So it's, is it doable? Absolutely. Is it parallel to the experience that we try to create for our students? It isn't.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. And I think that, I think within that is probably also a sense that with the, and I imagine there's research on this, but with increased class size beyond our limit that we have set, that starts to degrade the potential for achievement among the students that are impacted by that.
Yeah, there's I know when the board several years ago was looking at that class size policy, it was something that was looked at in terms of the impact. And there isn't a ton of research actually to support it at lower numbers, like if we're talking about the difference between 16 and 20. But I think from a student experience perspective, it certainly is a different thing.
Yes, it's below 1 for John Hattie fans.
Yeah.
Under 1 is less impact, right? So
yeah.
1's the number, right? You're looking for?
Yeah, perfect.
Impact size. Score of at least 1 or more. Is that all of them?
Oh, I have one more question that I remembered. So I think, it's helpful to have your presentation after Julie's, because I think that, Julie's reflections on both the expected impact of the assistant principal position, and then as she devoted time to tonight, the unexpected impacts, right? The things that she wouldn't necessarily have seen. I'm just curious, I guess this goes a little bit to Michelle's question of just at a certain point, how do we measure the impact of adding these positions? And I guess I'm just curious if, I think you've outlined a very good case for what an assistant principal position would do, but again, for for parents who are wondering about what this would mean, or taxpayers that are wondering about what this would mean, what do you sort of imagine just the whether not, maybe not a metric, but just like what would be a qualitative difference in terms of the student experience that adding that assistant principal would really give?
Yeah, and I'll give you quantitative. I know this wasn't your question, but to me, one quantitative one that I would be looking at is the data across my classrooms. So in my 13 classrooms, I want to see that kids are growing fairly equivalently across those. When I have disparate classrooms, that's when I feel like I'm not effective, right? Like my job is not creating rock star teachers. My job is creating rock star school. And to me, that really is an issue of equity and access for all kids, that it's not dependent on, when a parent's writing me a please place my kid in so-and-so's classroom, like that's not the kind of school we're trying to build, right? And so to me, the quantitative data I'd be looking at the end of each year is where did kids end the year, right, in each classroom, and where did kids grow in each classroom? And I would sure want those numbers to be pretty close, right? And that's things we could kind of talk about quantitatively. I think qualitatively, parent satisfaction, part of me is like parent satisfaction survey just went out because I completed it as a parent as well, ironically. And that is one piece I would want to look at is, do parents feel like their kids are getting an enriching experience? Do they feel like they're getting response from the school when they need it and the support in the way that they need it? To me, that would speak to the capacity. And I think it's why parents actually are passionate about class size often, even if the effect size, isn't Hattie's metric, that parents sometimes start to bristle at larger than typical class sizes in our district. So qualitatively, that's one piece I would look. And then the other piece I would look to is also staff and staff retention. And I feel like it's important to name, sometimes an assistant principal can feel like it's a principal ask because I'm the one who's here verbally making the request. But I think it's really important that my staff feel like they know they have somebody that they can get support from. And I think sometimes staff are apologetic when they need my time because they recognize that I work a lot and, that I have 50 plus staff that I supervise in the building, many of whom are newer, right, and need more support. And so I think the other piece I would look to qualitatively is the experience of teachers feeling like they have support when they need support with a student, and that we're able to retain staff. And I think that's going to become an increasingly important issue in the next decade as teacher pools they've shrunk already. And I anticipate that, as we talk about ed tech staffing, like, that's been a challenge. It's a challenge nationally. But I think part of the reason you problem solve retention is by creating great places to work where people feel supported and feel like people can respond to their needs in real time and also proactively, right? So those are kind of some of the qualitative metrics that come to mind.
That's so helpful, and thank you again for including the quantitative in that, because that all obviously is important as well. And I think that balance is indeed what we would be looking at to do any sort of evaluation. I think that was also what Julie was speaking to, right? It was a mixture of that quantitative and qualitative. So thank you so much.
Emily always has the data. We know she
Fred,
loves
hold
to
it.
dig into the data. Maura.
Thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate all the information. So I would have some concerns about reducing the number of third grade classrooms, but I know sometimes when we have a bubble, like I see in the fourth grade here, that we shift teachers around. So could you just speak to why we wouldn't decrease the number of third grade classrooms when we have fewer students there?
Can you tell me, and I don't have the sheet in front of me, will you remind me of next year's projected third grade?
91.
Yeah. And so what we've done historically when the policy was created is lean on the policy. And so the policy target is 20 with the recommended action at 22, which would be a cohort of 88, right? So that would be one option, certainly. Like if this didn't pass, probably what I would do is Julie and I would put our heads together so I could better understand the needs of that incoming second grade cohort to decide if the third or fourth grade cohort had that fifth teacher. And some of it isn't just about number. This conversation came up years ago, is about cohort and the needs of the students in the cohort. So since those numbers, are within 5, we probably would be looking at where we felt like that fifth classroom was going to be most beneficial.
That's helpful. I just wanted the community to know, like when we're looking at that. I know we sometimes those considerations come into play and across grades and where teachers are and all of that. So
Yep.
I appreciate that. And I just had one other question, the same one that I asked Holly and Julie. I hear your staffing concerns and your assistant principal request and the demands on at the administrative level. And are there issues with vacancies that are also where you see challenges at like the teacher or student level that you have?
Yeah, we've been fairly fortunate. We're not technically fully staffed, but we are relying on a retired employee who serves as an ed tech 3 days a week to fill a vacancy. And so we're rather than trying to fill that position when other schools have greater vacancies. So we've been fortunate. The challenge, I will say, is because to Julie's point, there's turnover in that ed tech the ed tech staffing situation, training staff. And these individuals who fill these roles are such hardworking individuals who are working with some of the most complex kids in the district. And the ability to build capacity while they're doing the job is challenging, right? So it's less, I think what we've experienced is less that we haven't been able to fill the position, although it took a while. It wasn't, I think, until December that we were fully staffed. But then you're trying to in real time train people for really challenging work and then retain those individuals when it is, the intensity of that work is very demanding.
So just to clarify my brain, 22 students is what we try to be under. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
for
for 3
third
through
grade,
5, 20 is the target. 22 is I think the language is
Okay.
is the
so
take
even if we
action
had
language.
4 teachers in third grade with the current enrollment, that we would have 22 3/4 students. So we'd be over even.
We're not going to cut any students into quarters.
Okay. Even if we did do that, we would be over. So even though we're cusp on that, it's not that we would. It's not a simple solution that we're missing. I think to Mara's point.
Yeah.
So great, thank you. And
Unfortunately,
thank you for
none
not cutting our students apart.
unfortunately, none of them are simple solutions, right? I mean, that's always the struggle. It's always, the struggle when we created the policy, right? Like, okay, well, what's our target? When are we going to try and do something? I mean, it's specifically written. The way it's written is we find other supports, we find other ways to meet the needs. It's not written in such a way that we have to do anything because, budgets are real numbers and real dollars out of real pockets. So, it's the goal. It's what we're shooting for in terms of the experience our kids are getting. I look at Julie's numbers coming up, right? Because that's our pipeline into Emily's in the upcoming year, and they're all in those high 80 numbers also. And there's a lot of. I think it's one of the struggles. I was always impressed with Will's ability to move people around. And I always felt terrible for Will that he had 10 grade levels, but he had a little more flexibility to move people that way because there's just more move potential, right? Like you guys are in buildings, and there's 3, that's it.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of wiggle room when there's only 3.
Yeah.
A little bit, but not a ton. So it's a hard discussion for sure.
And just to clarify, I think what I meant was that if we had only 80 students instead of 91,
Sure.
it would be
Simpler,
would have been the simple. That would have been the simple solution.
And we
They
wouldn't
would've
have,
done
we
that.
wouldn't
Just
have
to-
come with
just-
the ask.
and then it wouldn't even be an ask.
Yeah.
So just to say that again, if it comes before the board in this way, we know that there's a lot of careful consideration that's been put into.
And a
this
good
particular
example,
ask.
so our current 4th grade, which started the year at 88, was 90, was a cohort that was 5 classes as 3rd graders, and we shifted it to 4.
They were able to do that. Yeah. And I think, you offered up earlier, some of the thought process around other ways to tackle the problem. And I think most people on this board know how thoughtful the administrative team is, that you just don't come to the board with an ask to see, hey, maybe they'll give it to us, right? Like that's never the place you guys are coming from. But it is sometimes helpful for folks at home that are watching to hear the thought process. Like, we thought about doing it this way, but this is why that doesn't work. And not that you need to do it right now. But kind of having those points available might be helpful as we're deliberating, because it's a big ask.
Absolutely.
Other questions for Emily? Thank you.
Thanks.
To be continued, I imagine. All right. So instructional support, we're going to push till the 28th, right? And so new business. So 13. I'll get a motion on the floor and you can tell us what we're talking about. Do I have a motion for consideration and approval to adjust the 23-24 school year calendar by adding one student day in June at the Durham Community School? Beth? Tara, thank you.
Okay, if we think back to this fall, when we had some horrendous windstorms that took out power throughout the state, we had a day where students in all the schools except for Durham attended school. There was one day that there was a student day for all other schools, and that was because the generator was down at Durham. And it took us quite some time to get it repaired so that it could be operational again, because we couldn't have students that day. So because they did not have that student day, they will have dissimilar days to the rest of the district. So we'll need to make the student day up. And I reached out to Will and had his team think about what's the best way to do that for Durham students. And they feel the best way is to tack on a day at the end of the year just for Durham elementary students. And I reached out to the, commissioner, deputy commissioner, to make sure that, our reading of the statute was right. And you can either waive the day as a board or you can tack a day on. I don't recommend you waive a day. I recommend you tack it on, because if you recall, with the Lewiston shootings, we already waived 2 days, and I would not want to add a third day to Durham students for that. So that's why we're suggesting to tack a day on. Knowing that if Snowmageddon hits and we have many, many, many snow days that we have to tack on the end, then perhaps we might come back to the board to look at that. But right now, our recommendation is to tack a day on at the end of the school year. That also gives families a heads up that that's happening and allows people to plan. So that's what that's about.
Questions? Okay. So just so I didn't bring my paper from last week that had the current schedule. That doesn't throw them into the next week or anything yet, does it?
Not yet. I don't have it. And since Cynthia probably has the calendar in front of her.
Well,
I don't think so. I thought you probably had it in front of you.
Anecdotally, we were talking about this in my parent-teacher conference with my kids, and we're currently we have a required Monday with a half day. So actually,
yes, June
correct?
June 10th is because we've had one snow day and that's a Monday. So this will pop them into Tuesday. But if we have, obviously that changes.
Okay.
If as I say, we have more weather events.
Oh, in June when we're done. I was like, it's February, Beth. You may wish it's June, but it's not. Okay. And we had talked about in previous issues where we had something like this, looking at, do we get rid of a teacher day that's a non-student day and have students come to meet that requirement, or do we add an hour a day for a week, or but you and Will felt that just adding the day in June at this point, because we're not towards the end of June. I mean, June,
Right.
It would bring us to June 11th as of right now. So that's not
Right. That's the and he spoke with his leadership team what they thought was the best.
Yeah.
And tacking on the hours, it can be really disruptive to families. Can we do it? Yes. If we had lots and lots of snow days, might we consider it? Yes. But in this case, the best scenario is to tack that on.
Okay. Comments, questions? All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor, so we will move that to a vote. All those in favor? Great, none opposed. All right. Somewhere in here I have. All right. So number 14, personnel. This was one of the adjustments to the agenda, adding 14A. So do I have a motion for consideration and approval to adjust a full-time guidance counselor position at the Durham Community School to a wellness teacher position beginning in the 24-25 school year? Kara and Beth, thank you.
Okay, if we circle back to Will's presentation last week when we were clarifying also what the ask really is. He really hasn't asked for a half-time guidance counselor. We already have money in the budget for a position. This year, we budgeted for a full-time guidance person that got bumped to this the position that we have now, which is actually a PE teacher. The board changed that, if you recalled. We hired a PE teacher. Will and his team have evaluated their real need. They want it to be a wellness teacher. Since the money's already there for a teacher in the budget, if we can change it now for next year, we can post the position earlier and we get a much better pool of candidates, especially for a position like this, which might be trickier to fill. So that's the request. It makes his budget request cleaner as well. So that's why we're making this recommendation.
Limit the number of charts he has to bring and explain it to us. He also doesn't cut the teachers in half. You'll be happy to know, Colin. All right. Any questions? I appreciate the creativity of making the change now so we can get out ahead of the hiring, particularly given it seems like it's been a tough position to fill. So no other comments, questions? Great. All those in favor? None opposed. All right. We're back to public comment. If we had anyone who'd like to speak. This might be a record. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Kelly. Maura, all those in favor? No one's ever opposed to that. Have a great night.